Welcome to the fifth episode of the second season of the MediCrew Masterclasses. And today we are going to discuss about the pathophysiology and management of seizures and epilepsy. As usual, we'll be starting with a few questions. And today's session is divided into two parts. In the first part, we talk about the pathogenesis and clinical features of the common types of seizures. And in the second part, we discuss about the pharmacology and management of seizures and epilepsy. So the first part is about the classification of seizures and epileptogenesis. Let us start with a few introductory questions. This is your first question. A convulsion refers to. Next question. Epilepsy refers to. Next question. The commonest cause of epilepsy is. Next question. A 35-year-old man presented with aura followed by convulsion of one half of the body. Consciousness was not lost. So what is your diagnosis? Next question. A 10-year-old boy presented with poor academic performance. His IQ was normal to high. EEG after hyperventilation showed broad complexes, and you can see the broad complexes here. So what is your diagnosis? Next question. A 29-year-old woman presented with one episode of convulsion with fall and head injury. During convulsion, the whole body was shaking vigorously and there was involuntary micturition. So what is your diagnosis? And the last question before we start. Typical absence seizure is characterized by. So with this, let us start the discussion on the pathophysiology of common types of seizures. Now, there are some fundamental definitions that we need to understand before we start discussing about their pathogenesis. The words seizure, convulsion, and epilepsy are sometimes used interchangeably in colloquial literature. But actually, they have very separate connotations, and we must be very clear about what each of them represent. Let us assume that this represents the brain. Now, in the brain, there are different areas. For example, in the brain, we have the motor cortex, we have the sensory cortex, we have the auditory area, we have the visual area, we have other thinking areas or association areas. Now, if in the brain there is an abnormal synchronized electrical discharge, then certain parts of the brain may be activated. The mechanism of this electrical discharge may be unknown or may be known. But whenever there is an electrical stimulation of a particular part of the brain, the function of that part will be replicated. So, for example, if the motor cortex is stimulated, the person will start having movements. If the sensory cortex is stimulated, the person will have sensations. If the auditory cortex is stimulated, the person will start to hear sounds. If the occipital lobe is stimulated, the person can have various visions. So, whenever there is an abnormal synchronized electrical discharge, that is, a number of neurons together are discharging or giving out electrical current or action potentials, then different parts of the brain can be stimulated, and based on which part of the brain is stimulated, the patient will experience something. This basic phenomenon of any manifestation of an abnormal synchronized neural activity is known as a seizure. Whether it affects the motor cortex or it affects the sensory cortex or the auditory cortex or the olfactory or visual cortex, it doesn't matter. When any part of the brain is spontaneously stimulated by abnormal action potentials, something that we call synchronized electrical discharge, then the person will be experiencing what happens when that part of the brain is stimulated. And any of those manifestations can be called a seizure. So seizure refers to any manifestation of an abnormal synchronized electrical discharge from neurons of the brain. There was a time when people used to use the word cortical neurons, but nowadays we don't use that word because subcortical areas can also be involved in seizure generation. Since the brain has different functions like the motor function, the sensory function, the autonomic function, the thinking or the psychic function, therefore it is very prudent to understand that seizures can be broadly of four types. Motor seizures, which will manifest with movements, sensory seizures, which will manifest with sensory hallucinations. There may be autonomic seizures, where the patient will have fluctuation of autonomic function like breathing, like blood pressure or pulse, or psychic seizures, where the person has weird thinking patterns. This is something very difficult to diagnose from psychiatric disorders. So the seizures can be motor, sensory, autonomic, and psychic. Now you tell me, looking at these four types, out of these four types of seizure, which type of seizure is most easy for a second person to see and diagnose? Which is the most visible one? Obviously the motor seizure, because visible movement of the body parts will be seen here. Motor seizure being the most commonly seen seizure, it is given another name, convulsion. So any motor seizure is also known as a convulsion. So that means all convulsions are seizures, but all seizures are not convulsions. Epilepsy refers to a group of disease. It refers to a group of disease where there are recurrent seizures. So it is not the seizure which is called the epilepsy, but the tendency to have recurrent seizure one after the other is known as epilepsy. So epilepsy is a disorder where there is a tendency of recurrent seizures. So when a person is having recurrent seizures or at least 2 episodes of seizure, then you can diagnose epilepsy in that person. So a seizure is any manifestation of abnormal electrical activity in the brain. They can be motor, sensory, autonomic, and psychic. The motor seizures are also known as convulsions. And epilepsy is referred to disorders where there is a tendency of recurrent seizures. So are these three definitions clear to everyone? What is a seizure, what is a convulsion, and what is an epilepsy? Now, there are many conditions that look like seizure but are not actually seizures. These are called pseudo seizures. So they mimic seizures. So there are different kinds of episodes like panic attacks, hyperventilation syndromes, conversion disorders, previously known as hysteria. They can all look like seizure. The person can shake, the person can scream, and the person can fall on the ground because of different patterns of anxiety. But ultimately, these are not seizure because there is no focal electrical discharge in the brain. And they can be easily manipulated by the patient. If the patient wants, the attacks can be stopped. It is not totally involuntary. So these conditions are called pseudo seizures. These are very important for clinicians because when the patient's relatives come with a history of a seizure, we must be able to differentiate a true seizure from a pseudo seizure. A pseudo seizure usually is provoked by some emotional phenomenon. Usually there is no severe injury in the body because the patient can manage to maintain posture even if the patient falls. In pseudo seizure, often there is no tongue bite, there is no bleeding from the body, there is rarely involuntary micturition and defecation. So these things often differentiate pseudo seizure from a seizure. So with this basic idea about what is a seizure, convulsion, and epilepsy, let us start discussing about the different causes of seizure. Most seizures that we see, particularly epileptic seizures which recur, are idiopathic. Most of the cases we do not have a cause. More than 95% of all seizures are idiopathic in nature. Only for a small number of seizures we can find out a cause, and those are known as secondary seizures. Secondary seizures can be caused by various mechanisms. They can be caused by congenital or genetic disorders, where there is a malformation of the brain. For example, disorders which are grouped under the neurocutaneous syndromes, where the patient has different kinds of malformations of the brain and skin. The brain lesions can lead to seizures. There can be inflammatory causes that damage the brain and cause seizure. For example, meningitis or encephalitis or a brain abscess. Trauma to the head, that is head injury, can be an important cause of seizure. That is a post-traumatic seizure. Intracranial space-occupying lesions refer to tumors of the brain. And brain tumors can often be causes of seizures. Space occupying lesion can also be infective in nature, for example, neurocysticercosis, which is the larva stage of the tinea solium. There may be vascular causes of seizure, for example, cerebrovascular accident, which is commonly known as a stroke. Certain drugs can lead to seizure. Any drug that is stimulant in nature might cause excessive neural activity, for example, the amphetamine derivatives. Various kinds of intoxications can lead to seizures. For example, strychnine poisoning. There are different metabolic causes of seizure, like hypoglycemia, hyponatremia, all of which can cause seizures. Certain deficiency disorders can lead to seizures. For example, vitamin B1 deficiency. The vitamin B1 deficiency can lead to Wernicke's encephalopathy. There may be physical causes of seizure, for example, electrocution or heat stroke. And there can be many other causes of seizure. For example, there is a pattern of seizure that occurs during fever in children. So whenever there is a fever, there is a seizure. This is called febrile convulsion. So you understand that there are so many different secondary causes of seizure. Despite this, the most common cause of epileptic seizure is idiopathic. In most of the cases, the causes are molecular, with changes in ion channels or receptors or neuronal connections that cannot be easily found out by simple investigation. So they remain idiopathic in clinical practice. So in majority of the cases, we do not know the cause of the seizure, and therefore the treatment is purely symptomatic. So are the causes of secondary seizures clear to everyone? Okay. Now, because most of the seizures are not understood in terms of their cause or etiology, so it's easier to classify seizure by their clinical feature rather than by their cause. Because in most cases, we don't know the cause. Now, seizures are broadly divided into two categories based on where they start and which part of the body they involve. If a seizure only affects one half of the body, maybe the right side or the left side, then it is called partial seizure. And when it affects both sides of the body, then it is known as generalized seizure. So when only one half of the body is affected, it is called partial seizure. And when both sides of the body are affected, either simultaneously or one after the other, then it is known as generalized seizure. And these are again further classified into different types. Before we go into the different types and their clinical features, let us see the broad classification of seizures. So seizures can be partial, they can be generalized, and they can be unclassified when they cannot be categorized into these two types. Partial seizures include simple partial seizure, complex partial seizure, and partial seizure with secondary generalization. I'll explain each of them separately. Generalized seizures include absence seizure, tonic-clonic seizure, atonic seizure, and myoclonic seizure. And unclassified seizures include neonatal seizures and infantile spasms. So this is a broad classification of different kinds of primary seizures. Let us now get into the discussion of the individual types of seizures. First, coming over to the partial seizures. So, what are the features that characterize a partial seizure? So, as the name suggests, it affects one half of the body, which also means it actually affects one half of the brain. So, the opposite half of the body is affected. Secondly, in partial seizure, consciousness may or may not be lost. If consciousness is not lost, it is called simple partial seizure. And if the consciousness is lost, it is called complex partial seizure. So the consciousness may or may not be lost. And if consciousness is not lost, it is called simple partial seizure. If consciousness is lost, it is known as complex partial seizure. Next, many of the partial seizures, particularly complex partial seizures, involve the temporal lobe. And because they involve the temporal lobe, they are sometimes known as temporal lobe epilepsy. And because the auditory area is in the temporal lobe and the visual fibers of the optic radiation also pass through the temporal lobe, it's very common that sometimes these patients will have auditory or visual hallucinations. The auditory hallucinations may be either a vague sound or it can also be a formed auditory hallucination. For example, hearing a music. The visual hallucinations can be just a blur vision, or it can also be a very formed visual hallucination, like seeing trees, houses, ghosts, or gods. There can also be olfactory hallucination, which can lead to the sensation of having a bad or unusual smell, which is not actually felt by others. Along with this, there may be very simple repetitive movements. For example, there can be movements uh, like that of chewing. So the patient may make teeth grinding movement, lip smacking movement, automatic movement like swinging the hands or picking on the clothes. So this kind of phenomena are very common. And together, therefore, you see, it looks like a psychiatric manifestation like that of schizophrenia. There is hallucination, there are abnormal behavior, people are complaining of supernatural phenomena. And for this reason, these seizures were sometimes called psychomotor epilepsy because of the psychic and the motor components. Another very interesting phenomenon is that many patients undergoing the seizure, partial seizure, can experience deja vu or jamais vu. Deja vu refers to the phenomenon where you have a sense of familiarity in an unfamiliar environment. So, suppose you are sitting in a new classroom, you have never been there. Suddenly, you start feeling that you have been to this place before. You have seen these people before. You have been in this exact position sometime before. This kind of a very creepy, uncanny sensation creeps into your mind. So, deja vu phenomenon means a sense of familiarity with unfamiliar situations. Jamai's Fu is the opposite of this. It's a sense of unfamiliarity with a familiar situation. Maybe you are visiting a particular college or class every day. Suddenly, on one day, you start feeling you have never been here. That kind of a sensation is the Jamai's Fu phenomenon. So, it's a sense of unfamiliarity with a familiar situation. Out of deja vu and Jamai's Fu, I'm asking the participants, how many of you had deja vu before? Just write yes or why, or you can just raise your hand. That's a large number of people. How many of you had Jamai's Fu before? No one, basically. So, what does it tell you? It tells us that deja vu, although it happens more frequently in partial seizure, but deja vu may not indicate a pathology. It's seen in normal individuals as well. Jamai's Vu, on the other hand, always indicates a pathology. It is never seen in people with normal cortical function. So, if there is Jamai's Vu phenomenon, chances are that you have some kind of a disorder, some kind of a epileptic disorder. But having a deja vu is not necessarily associated with diseases. It is also seen that people who are creative or inclined to the uh, uh, representative hemisphere, they have more frequent deja vu than those who are more calculative and have a categorical function of the hemisphere. These are only propositions, but what I'm trying to say is deja vu is a normal phenomenon. So there is actually nothing to worry about if you have deja vu. But if you have Jamai's Fu, a sense of unfamiliarity with a familiar situation, it can be a sign that there is an underlying psychopathology. Along with this, there can be distortion of reality, which is very interesting. Some people can think suddenly that things in the surrounding have shrunken, they have become small in size. And this is called micropsia. Suddenly they will think that the people, the trees, everything have become small. Because everything looks small, it is also known as Lilliputian hallucination. The opposite also happens rarely, which is called macropsia. Everything seems to be grown and out of proportion. And this is sometimes known as hallucination of giants. And they will happen only during the phase of the aura or the epilepsy, not before and after that. Some people may have both micropsia and macropsia together. And this reminds us very much of the film Alice in the Wonderland, where things are shrunken to small sizes or sometimes inflated to large proportions. That is why when a person with partial epilepsy has both micropsia and macropsia, the condition is called Alice in Wonderland syndrome. So you can understand that partial epilepsy, particularly complex partial seizure, has a very fantastic kind of manifestation. It has manifestations mimicking the supernatural, mimicking a dreamy state. And therefore, it forms the basis of many of the superstitious beliefs that seizures are caused by spirits or entities. And this history is embedded in the term seizure. The word seizure means to seize or to catch hold of. Historically, the word seizure meant to be possessed by someone. So, although we know that it is not caused by that mechanism, the word seizure has become so popular that we could not dump the word. So, we still carry forward the word seizure, reminding us of a previous belief that it is supernatural in origin. Now, let us come to generalized seizures. Generalized seizures can be of different types. One very particular type of generalized seizure, distinct from all others, is absence seizure. Absence seizure is characterized by absent-mindedness. It is a disease where the person is mentally detached from the surrounding. So, the affected person essentially zones out, forgets everything about the surrounding, and just goes into a trance. The episodes are very short and typically less than 10 seconds. But it can happen many times. The frequency can be very high. The frequency can be 100 per day. But each episode is usually less than 10 seconds. And during this time, the person becomes absent minded or detached from reality, but maintains muscle tone and posture. So the person never falls. Person will never fall on the ground, unlike the other kinds of seizure. There may be some spontaneous automatic movements like crushing of the teeth, smacking the lip, or blinking the eyes. Other than this, there is not much motor manifestation. So you will see that a person is staring in one direction with a peculiar movement of the fingers or of the teeth. This happens for 5 to 10 seconds and stops. This is how the episode occurs. But it can happen repeatedly in a single day. And because during this time the person cannot remember anything, so particularly during academic sessions like classes or seminars, the person zones out. The person cannot understand anything because there are gaps, there are islands of ignorance in between in the whole lecture. There were parts that he did not follow. The disorder typically starts after 5 years of age. And luckily, spontaneously stops by adolescence. Again, very luckily, it almost never complicates into other types of seizure. So typically, because it starts after 5 years of age when the student is in class 1 or 2, so typically the parents will complain that the child is not attentive, is getting very low grades in the school. That's because the child cannot follow the studies. But when you individually interview the child in the episode when there is no seizure, the child's intelligence is normal. So you cannot diagnose a lack of intelligence in that child. So the intelligent quotient is normal, but the child is overall inattentive. Typically, the parents will say that this child can answer everything at home, but in the examination, the child does not write anything. So this is how it starts. And by adolescence, it stops. So typically, again, the parents might say that in the childhood, the child was very inattentive. But once the child was promoted to class 9 or 10, suddenly he or she became very studious and started doing good results. This is the kind of story that you hear about children having absence seizures. In order to diagnose absence seizures, sometimes we use a protocol known as hyperventilation protocol. So you attach the EEG leads to the brain, that is to the skull, and then you ask the patient to breathe rapidly, hyperventilate. Now, if the person is breathing very rapidly, obviously the carbon dioxide goes out, so there is a alkalosis in the brain. We exactly do not know how, but alkalosis triggers absence seizure if the person already has absence seizure. So it's not like anybody who is hyperventilating will develop absence seizure. But if a person has absence seizure, then hyperventilation triggers the absence seizure. So if the child has absence seizure, doing the hyperventilation protocol will trigger an attack of absence seizure. And instead of the low frequency ECGs that you are seeing, you will suddenly see high amplitude EEGs like this. This kind of a high amplitude EEG is characteristic of absence seizure. So when hyperventilation shows a broad complex EEG, it often indicates that the child has absence seizure. Now, all these findings that I discussed here are features of a typical absence seizure, also known as a petit mal epilepsy. Mal means bad, petit means small. In older days, as I told you, seizures were thought to be due to demons or spirits, and they were called mal or bad influences. And the bad influences were classified into small bad influences like the absence seizures and big bad influences like the tonic-clonic seizures. This is the origin of the word petit mal and grand mal epilepsy. Of course, we do not use the words nowadays because it's only a remainder of the superstition that we had. We will call them absence seizures. So absence seizures can be typical and atypical. And the characteristics that I discussed here are the characteristics of a typical absence seizure. If you make any of these just reversed, just make it opposite, it becomes an atypical absence seizure. So in atypical absence seizure, episodes will be longer than 10 seconds. The person may not maintain normal muscle tone and posture. Automatic movements will be there, but they will be more dramatic, like tonic-clonic seizure. It will typically start before 5 years, and then it will not stop by adolescence. And in the adulthood, it can complicate into other types of seizure. So atypical absence seizure is something that we are actually afraid of. Jui, I think you got your answer. So like if we compare typical and atypical absence seizure, you see the atypical absence seizure typically occurs in an age less than 5 years. It is often associated with other types of seizure. The duration is usually more than 10 seconds. Muscle tone may be altered. It may complicate into other seizure types, and therefore the overall prognosis is much poor. So are absence seizures clear to everyone? Okay. The next important type of seizure is tonic-clonic seizure, something that we commonly associate with seizures. The typical dramatic seizure where a person falls on the ground with vigorous shaking of the body. This is what tonic-clonic seizure means. So, how do tonic-clonic seizures usually present? A tonic-clonic seizure typically presents with a few specific stages. The patient begins with an aura, a typical sense of uneasiness. And many people who have had previous episodes of seizure can understand that a seizure is going to happen. This is followed by the tonic phase, where the muscle tone of the body suddenly becomes highly increased. So there is spasm of the whole body. Because of the increase in tone of the respiratory muscle, air rushes out of trachea, causing a whistle-like sound. Something that is known as epileptic cry. This is followed by fall on ground because the person will not be able to maintain muscle tone, and there is a clonic phase, which means there is vigorous contraction of the muscles. It is during this stage that most of the injury occurs. There can also be tongue bite. There can be respiratory arrest. There can be rhabdomyolysis, that is degeneration of the skeletal muscle because of overactivity. By rhabdomyolysis, myoglobin will come out in the body and it will be excreted through urine, causing myoglobinuria. And you know that all hemoproteins are nephrotoxic, so this can cause renal failure. So this is the phase that is most fatal, the clonic phase. This is followed by a post-ictal confusion. So gradually the contraction subsides, but the patient sits confused. All the neurons in the brain are refractory and the patient cannot understand anything, cannot remember anything. This is known as a post-ictal, that is after seizure confusion. Remember, post-ictal confusion is absent in absence seizure. It is present in tonic-clonic seizure. And finally, with time, the person recovers, and this is called the phase of recovery. So these are the stages through which a typical generalized tonic-clonic seizure, or GTCS, evolves. It is one of the most visible and dramatic manifestation of seizure. It is definitely a convulsive seizure because there is visible muscle contraction. And it progresses through aura, tonic phase, fall, clonic phase, postictal confusion, and recovery phase. So are the stages of a generalized tonic-clonic seizure and its complications clear to everyone? Okay. So the two other relatively rare types of seizures are myoclonic seizure. In myoclonic seizure, as the name suggests, there can be spasm of different groups of muscles, but without the dramatic presentation of tonic-clonic seizure. And in atonic seizure, the muscle tone suddenly drops. So instead of contraction, there is relaxation of the muscle, and the person might fall on the ground. So it can look like a syncope, it can look like a narcolepsy attack. So it has to be carefully differentiated from other causes of fall on the ground. Myoclonic and atonic seizure never happen alone. They usually happen in a same person who has tonic-clonic seizure. So the same person who has tonic-clonic seizure will occasionally have myoclonic or atonic seizure. That is why we don't use a separate drug for myoclonic or atonic seizure. We use the same drugs that can be used for tonic-clonic seizures. So from a very broader way of speaking, generalized seizures are mostly absence or tonic-clonic. And if it is tonic-clonic, it can be sometime associated with myoclonic or atonic. So these are the basic seizure types. I hope this is clear to everyone. So what causes a seizure? At a cellular mechanism, we understand that a seizure is overactivity of the neuron. So either there is too much of excitation or there is too little of inhibition. Too much of excitation can be due to excess sodium entry into the neuron, excess calcium entry into the neuron, which can be mediated by the excitatory neurotransmitters like glutamate and aspartate. Too little inhibition can be due to reduced chloride entry into the cell or reduced potassium efflux from the cell. And this is due to a deficiency of the neurotransmitter GABA. So essentially, an imbalance between excitation and inhibition causes a seizure. But this does not explain why epilepsies happen. Certain causes may cause excess excitation. Some causes can cause reduced inhibition. But why will it keep on recurring in the same person again and again? To understand this, we will use a theory to explain epileptogenesis. This theory is sometimes known as the kindling hypothesis. So what does this theory essentially say about the genesis of epilepsy? Please understand that we know very little about the mechanism of epileptogenesis. So these are only theoretical propositions, and we are not even sure whether these are true. It proposes that there may be certain background genetic factors, certain immediate triggers, and mostly unknown factors. These factors, by some unexplained mechanism, that is why this is idiopathic. Most of the things are unexplained. We do not know how this happens. So these factors, by some unexplained mechanism, can lead to a sequence of abnormal neural stimulus. This is defined as a train of, that is a sequence of abnormal neuronal stimulus. We have learned in our previous episodes on memory and learning that when the same stimulus is repeated again and again, it causes long-term potentiation that helps in learning. So here also, when the genetic factors like an abnormal sodium or calcium channel, unknown factors, they cause repeated neural stimulus, it leads to a learning experience for the brain. And this causes long-term changes in the neural circuits, which is called long-term potentiation. So this is actually the learning process gone wrong. The brain is learning something which is harmful for the body. And this long-term potentiation includes several changes that occur within the body. For example, increased activity of sodium and calcium channels. There can be increased number of excitatory neurotransmitter receptors like glutamate receptors. There can be increased release of nerve growth factors. So abnormal synapses will increase in number. Number of abnormal synapses will increase. And finally, there will be sprouting of new neural connections. Again, in an abnormal manner, which is known as synaptic plasticity. And all these things together will lead to the formation of abnormal low resistance reverberating circuits. I'll explain this term. So what is an abnormal low resistance reverberating circuit? Let us assume that there is already a type of connection present in the neurons. So neuron 1 is connected by its own resistance to neuron 2. Neuron 2 is connected by its own resistance to neuron 3. Neuron 3 has some specific functions that it performs. Now suppose suddenly there is a kind of connection formed, for example, another neuron or a branch of the neuron forms a connection with the third neuron directly. And this pathway has a resistance which is much less compared to the resistance in the other two circuits. As a result, if a current generates in the neuron 1, it will have a tendency to always follow the path of least resistance and reach the third neuron directly instead of going through this long way. So this kind of circuits that bypass long pathways are known as low resistance circuit. And if a low resistance circuit forms a circular loop, for example, if the low resistance circuit forms a loop like this is neuron 1, neuron 2, neuron 3, neuron 4, neuron 5, neuron 6, then the current will keep on encircling until it dies off due to lack of energy. This kind of an encircling circuit is known as a reverberating circuit. It's very much similar to re-entry circuit in the heart. What is re-entry circuit in the heart is similar to reverberating circuit in the brain. So a single stimulus will cause multiple action potentials by rotating through a circuit. And it has special affinity for the circuit because it's a low resistance one. So did you understand what is the meaning of low resistance reverberating circuit? And this neuronal loop will form due to sprouting of new connections. That is synaptic plasticity. So it doesn't mean that any synaptic plasticity will cause this. That is why not everyone will develop epilepsy. It's a matter of chance. Some people will escape the phenomena and some people will develop the phenomena. Those unfortunate people who will develop the phenomena will develop the epilepsy. So I hope it is clear up to this. Now this formation of this low resistance reverberating circuits, whenever they are stimulated by an electrical discharge, will lead to seizures. And the triggers can be different for different people, often unexplained. So there are different factors, mostly unknown, that lead to a series of abnormal neuronal stimulus. This causes long-term changes in the neural circuits, known as long-term potentiation, which ultimately causes increased activity of sodium and calcium channels, increase in glutamate receptors, increased release of nerve growth factors, and sprouting of new neural connections, known as synaptic plasticity. This leads to formation of abnormal low resistance reverberating circuits, which upon a trigger will lead to seizures. And because the circuit is already there, so it keeps on recurring again and again, leading to an epilepsy. So this is a working model of epilepsy. Is this clear to everyone? So based on this, let us try to solve the questions that we started with. A convulsion refers to. Wonderful. It refers to the motor manifestations of seizure. Epilepsy refers to. Very good. It refers to recurrent seizures. Commonest cause of epilepsy is. Yes, the commonest cause of epilepsy is idiopathic. A 35-year-old man presented with aura followed by convulsion of one half of the body. Consciousness was not lost. So what is your diagnosis? Very good. This is simple partial seizure. A 10-year-old boy presented with poor academic performance. His IQ was normal to high. EEG after hyperventilation showed broad complexes. So, what is your diagnosis? Very good. This is a typical absence seizure. A 29-year-old woman presented with one episode of convulsion with fall and head injury. During convulsion, the whole body was shaking vigorously and there was involuntary micturition. So, what is your diagnosis? Very good. This is generalized tonic-clonic seizure. Typical absence seizure is characterized by yes, the answer is C, muscle tone unaltered. All the other points are features of atypical absence seizure. So with this, we end the first part, and the second part is treatment of seizures and epilepsy. Let's try this question. A 22-year-old man was diagnosed with complex partial seizure. What is the drug of choice? Next question. A 15-year-old girl was diagnosed with typical absence seizure. She has fatty liver and polycystic ovarian syndrome. What is the drug of choice? Next question. Valproic acid acts by. Next question. Lamotrigine acts by. Next question. GABA receptor can bind all except. Next question. Neuronal reuptake of GABA is prevented by. Next question. Status epilepticus is most commonly caused by. Next question, and the last one of the series. true about pregnant women receiving anti-epileptic drugs. So which statement is true? Okay, so with these questions, let us now start the second part. Uh, as we discussed before, in most cases, we don't know the cause of epilepsy. So anti-epileptic therapies are symptomatic therapies. It is anti-epileptic drugs are those drugs that decreases the frequency or severity of seizures in people with epilepsy. It only treats the symptom of the seizure, not the cause, not the underlying epileptic condition. For example, if there is a sodium channel mutation, it cannot treat that mutation. It only blocks the sodium channel so that the seizure doesn't occur. The fundamental goal of the therapy is to increase the quality of the life by minimizing seizures and adverse drug effects. So remember that epilepsies cannot be cured and the treatment has to go on lifelong. The molecular targets of anti-epileptic drugs are very simple. They are the targets that cause the seizure. So they can block voltage-gated sodium channel. They can potentiate the GABA system or its chloride channel. They can block T-type calcium channels, or they can inhibit the glutamate system. These are the four fundamental mechanisms by which any anti-epileptic drug would work. Now, if you look into this diagram, please follow carefully. This diagram shows a very simple circuit where there is an excitatory neuron, there is a postsynaptic neuron, and there is an inhibitory neuron. So the postsynaptic neuron is under the control of two neurons, an excitatory one and an inhibitory one. Our aim in epilepsy is to inhibit the excitatory neuron and stimulate the inhibitory neuron. So let's see how that can be done. So there are different targets that we can use. In the neuron, there are voltage-gated sodium channels. So we can block the voltage-gated sodium channels by drugs like carbamazepine, felbamate, lamotrigine, etc. The calcium channels of the presynaptic neuron have a modulating subunit called alpha 2 delta. As calcium enters, there is exocytosis of neurotransmitter. So we can block the alpha 2 delta subunit. This is done by gabapentin or pregabalin. We can directly block the calcium channel so that release of neurotransmitter does not happen. These are the effects of ethosuximide and also partial effects of lamotrigine and zonisamide. Although the main effect of lamotrigine is sodium channel block. There is a vesicular protein known as SV2A or synaptic vesicular protein 2A, and this helps in the release of neurotransmitter. This can be blocked by the drug levetiracetam. The potassium channel causes repolarization. So opening the potassium channel will make the neuron negative, that is repolarized or hyperpolarized. So action potential will stop. So potassium channel activators can also be used to stop ongoing action potential. Retigabin is a prospective drug. The glutamate receptors like NMDA or AMPA receptors can also be inhibited by drugs like felbamate, lamotrigine, or topiramate. And the activity of GABA can be potentiated by barbiturates, felbamate, tiagabin, topiramate, valproate, and other drugs. So this is a summary of how different drugs work, and uh, you can see how discovery of different drugs was done. The first few drugs to be discovered were mostly the sodium channel blockers like phenytoin in the 1938, and this was followed by discovery of other drugs like the calcium channel blockers, mixed acting drugs like valproate, then drugs that belong to the benzodiazepine family like diazepam, clonazepam, GABA transporter inhibitor like tiagabin, GABA transaminase stimulator like inhibitor like vigabatrin, and drugs with initially unknown mechanisms of action like gabapentin and levetiracetam. We usually classify antiepileptic drugs into two broad categories, and these categories are established drugs and newer drugs. We usually start treatment with established drug and then move on to the newer drugs. Valproate, carbamazepine, phenytoin, phenobarbital, ethosuximide, clobazam, clonazepam, and primidone, also to some extent lamotrigine, are established antiepileptics. The other drugs like levetiracetam, oxcarbazepine, gabapentin, pregabalin, tiagabin, etc. are the newer antiepileptic drugs. The choice of drug is totally based on evidence. So there is no exact reason why we use a particular drug in a particular seizure. It's totally based on evidence and statistical data. So it is seen that in any kind of partial seizure, carbamazepine is the drug of choice, whether it is simple partial or complex partial. In any type of generalized tonic-clonic seizure, valproate is the drug of choice. In absence seizure, both valproate and ethosuximide can be used. And in all other types of seizure, again, valproate is the drug of choice. So we can say valproate is the drug of choice for any seizure, except partial seizure, where carbamazepine is the drug of choice, and absence seizure, where simultaneously ethosuximide is a drug of choice. For all others, you can start with valproate. The tricarboxylic acid cycle or the Krebs cycle is an open cycle. Molecules go out of the cycle and again enter the cycle. And this is very important because the alpha ketoglutarate, which is formed in the Krebs cycle, is converted into glutamate by the action of GABA transaminase. This glutamate is converted to GABA by glutamic acid dehydrogenase, and again by GABA transaminase into succinic semialdehyde, which is converted to succinate and goes back to the TCA cycle. This is known as the GABA shunt. The interesting part is that the same cycle gives rise to both excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitter. So the balance of activity between the GAD enzyme and the GABA T enzyme determines which one will take upper hand. There are different drugs acting on the GABA system. GABA receptor can be stimulated by barbiturates, benzodiazepines, progesterone, ganaloxone, which is a neurosteroid. So if you see the GABA receptor, it has 5 sites. GABA receptor has a benzodiazepine site where benzodiazepines can bind, a barbiturate site where barbiturates can bind. It has a steroid site where neurosteroids and progesterone can bind. It has a picrotoxin site where the toxin picrotoxin can bind. Also important is that the benzodiazepine site can be inhibited by drugs like flumazenil. So they can also bind. So we have a benzodiazepine site, we have a barbiturate site, a steroid site, and picrotoxin site. The final site, of course, is of the natural agonist, that is GABA. So there is a GABA binding site. So these are the 5 sites of the GABA receptor. GABA uptake can be blocked by tiagabin, thereby increasing the concentration of GABA in the synapse. GABA transaminase can be blocked by vigabatrin, which increases the concentration of GABA. GAD or glutamate dehydrogenase can be inhibited, can be stimulated by gabapentin or valproate, causing more GABA production. And progabite is a prodrug which is converted into GABA inside the body. The glutamate system is also important. Glutamate has different types of receptors that use sodium and calcium ions, called ionotropic receptors and receptors that have second messenger pathways known as the metabotropic receptors. The most important ionotropic receptors are NMDA, AMPA, and kainate receptors. NMDA receptor can be blocked by felbamate and levetiracetam. AMPA or kainate receptor can be blocked by topiramate. And the metabotropic receptor blockers are under research. Sodium channels can be blocked by drugs like carbamazepine, phenytoin, lamotrigine, and valproate. So you can see valproate has multiple mechanisms of action. T-type calcium channel can be blocked by ethosuximide and valproate, two drugs that are both equally useful in the treatment of absence seizure. However, valproate has a few side effects. It can cause weight gain, fatty liver, and polycystic ovarian syndrome. So valproate should be avoided in this condition. In such situation, we should use ethosuximide in place of valproate. So in anti-epileptic drug therapy, why would a patient stop responding? What is the cause of the resistance or false resistance to anti-epileptics? One cause can be a wrong diagnosis. Maybe a secondary seizure has been diagnosed as a primary seizure, and therefore you are not removing the underlying cause. The second cause can be a wrong drug. Maybe you have chosen the wrong group of drug for the wrong seizure. For example, partial seizures should be treated first with carbamazepine. Suppose you have started with topiramate, that is not the drug of choice, and therefore it can cause resistance to therapy. The third cause can be a wrong dose. Often, the new doctors are afraid to give high therapeutic doses. For example, the anti-epileptic dose of valproate is about 1000 to 1500 milligram per day. If you give it in a very low dose like 200 milligram per day, it will not work. And finally comes the so-called wrong patient, where the patient is not taking the drug properly or is not following the lifestyle precautions properly, leading to resistance to drug therapy. When after adding two different anti-epileptic drugs, the patient does not respond, this is a high time that you refer the patient to an epilepsy clinic with specialty referral. When a seizure keeps on happening and does not stop for about 5 minutes, previously it was called 30 minutes, but now we call it 5 minutes, then it is known as status epilepticus. Most of them are generalized tonic-clonic seizure. However, we can also have a complex partial or absent status epilepticus. The most common cause of status epilepticus is withdrawal of anti-epileptic drug. The patient stops taking drug. That is the most common cause. The management should be done very urgently because it can cause hypoxia, hypotension, acidosis, rhabdomyolysis, and then this can lead to renal failure. The stepwise management of status epilepticus, that is convulsive status epilepticus, is like this. In the first 5 minutes, you establish the diagnosis. You establish airway, breathing, and circulation, which in emergency medicine is called ABC. Set up an intravenous line, draw blood for metabolic and toxic study, and anti-epileptic drug level. If you think there is a thiamine deficiency or alcohol intoxication, immediately give thiamine. If you think there is hypoglycemia, immediately give glucose intravenous. If you think there is meningitis, encephalitis, or septicemia, give an antimicrobial agent. By the time the patient has been stabilized, administer benzodiazepine. The drug of choice is either lorazepam or diazepam. After the seizures stop, give phenytoin to prevent recurrence. Administer phenytoin at a high rate of infusion if the status epilepticus persists. Monitor ECG because phenytoin is also a class 1 antiarrhythmic, so it can cause heart blocks. Monitor the blood pressure and pay attention to respiratory depression. If after 30 minutes the seizure still does not stop, administer general anesthesia using phenobarbital, thiopentone, propofol, or midazolam, and continue mechanical ventilation until the patient recovers. treat the complications, and monitor with EEG. So this is the stepwise management of a status epilepticus. So I hope this is clear to everyone. Pregnancy gives us a number of challenges because all anti-epileptic drugs are teratogenic and they can cause neural tube defect. So only use the most effective drug in the lowest effective dose. Supplement folic acid daily to prevent neural tube defect. Explain the risk and benefit of the therapy to the mother and monitor the feto-maternal well-being clinically and with ultrasonography. So this is what you can do during pregnancy to administer anti-epileptic therapy. So now let us start the questions that we started with. So a 22-year-old man was diagnosed with complex partial seizure. What will be your drug of choice? Very good. The answer will be carbamazepine. Any partial seizure, its treatment should be started with carbamazepine. A 15-year-old girl was diagnosed with typical absence seizure. She has fatty liver and polycystic ovarian syndrome. What will be the drug of choice? Very good. The answer will be ethosuximide. A and C are potential drugs, but you cannot give valproate because the patient already has fatty liver and polycystic ovarian syndrome. So switch over to ethosuximide, which is much safer for the patient. Valproic acid acts by. Very good. It acts by all the mechanisms stated above, and that is why it is also known as a broad spectrum anti-epileptic. Lamotrigine acts by. Mention the most important mechanism. Yes, the most established mechanism of lamotrigine is blocking the sodium channels. GABA receptor can bind all except. Very good. The answer is E because it can actually bind all of these. Neuronal reuptake of GABA is prevented by. Very good. The answer is tiagabin, which prevents neural reuptake of GABA. Status epilepticus is most commonly caused by. Wonderful. It's most commonly caused by anti-epileptic drug withdrawal. And the last question, true about pregnant women receiving anti-epileptic drugs. Very good. There is risk of fetal neural tube defect.